Meraki friends, and welcome back to the Crafty Meraki YouTube channel. My name is Deepa from Designs by Dee, and today I have just a little bit of a different video for you. So this one is all about discovering die cutting. It's about the essential tools and the like a couple techniques that are perfect for beginners. So I have all of my supplies out here, and I just really want to go over some of the fundamentals of die cutting. Now, the stuff that I'm going to be showing, there you see a bunch of brands here. I don't necessarily mean that these brands are the best, but they're ones that seem to work for me. I tend to use a few different things and then pick what it is that I like, and it's completely subjective. It's up to you. Whatever you pick will probably work, and you'll through time figure out what works best for you. So the first question here is, what is die cutting? Now, very simple. Die cutting is where you use metal dies like these ones here. These are the canopy dies by Crafty Meraki, and you can see that they're pretty thin, but they have these ridges whereby they stick up a little higher, and they're basically cutting ridges. So when you apply pressure to these dies, and the dies are on top of different media such as cardstock, paper, so many different things, it will cut that out. And every ridge that is on here is going to cut. So even those little squiggly lines in the center of the leaves are going to cut. Now, what I'm showing you here are the little holes that are included in the die. Now, those are specifically put there so that if your paper or whatever media you're using gets stuck in your die, you can kind of stick these little pokey tools through and pick them out. Now, there are so many different pokey tools on there. You can see I had a curved one there. This one's a little longer. It goes a little further through the hole. Now, it's totally dependent on what you desire to use. And I'll go over those tools a little bit more in a minute. Now, as I said, you're going to get a bunch of different dies. The Meraki dies are these bronze dies. It can be a whole bunch of different colors, and they can also have little lines in them that are not as deep, and they'll probably emboss instead. So the next question is, what can I die cut? Well, the answer is anything really that's thin enough. So if you're going for something more like a thicker cardboard or like a thicker chipboard, that's probably not going to cut. If you look at those dies, they're not, the lines or the ridges don't go that deep. But all of these things that I have here, like specialty cardstocks, like the foiled and the glitter cardstock, the plain cardstock, I've got vellum, acetate, and this is even some felt. You could cut felt. You could cut any type of fabric as well. I think you can cut leather. You can cut anything that is soft enough. You can cut foam. It's going to cut anything that can basically comply or like be malleable and sort of become a bit thinner, or anything that is thin to begin with. And by thin, I mean like if you have a thicker chipboard, I think that's where we kind of draw the line. Which die cutting machine should I use? So it's really a matter of preference. There are so many different ones out there. I use the Sizzix Big Shot Plus. This I like because it is bigger. You can see that there's a crank. It's a manual die cutting machine. So as I said, you have to crank it through. There are ones that are electronic. So it has like electronic hub on it where it'll feed your die and your cardboard and your sandwich through. And there are also ones that are computerized. Now those are getting a little bit fancy. So I just wanted to show you probably the one that's most cost effective for you if you're just starting out, which is the manual die cutting machine. Now, as you can see, the Sizzix Big Shot, it's big. I can't even get the full thing in my view here. There are, as I said, smaller ones. There's like the Platinum machine. There's so many like medium-sized machines that you could use. I just chose this one because I can cut bigger dies or smaller dies, and it does functions as both. I don't have to get out a bigger machine if I have something bigger. I use the bigger one. Now, as you can see, each die cutting machine has its own set of adapter plates. Like this one has a platform, there's the adapter A, and then you also have your acrylic cutting pads. Now, mine are super warped. I'm sorry about that. They are really well used. I don't have any new plates to show you, but the new plates would be exactly the same, just nice and flat, not as curved, and with they'd be clearer so you could see through them. These have a lot of cuts in them already because they've been used a lot. I don't actually even use these acrylic pads anymore because they are just really heavily used. I use another set, but these are just small enough to show you in this video. So there are two there. You can see that I have one that's got a lot of cuts in it. That's like my cutting pad. So I'll put my die in so that it cuts into that pad, and then the one on the top is just simply to create the sandwich. And you can see it still goes through the machine even though it's heavily warped. I just get this kind of duck thing going on where it creates like a beak on either side as you put it through. Now, what is a sandwich with respect to die cutting? So a sandwich, oh, what do we got? We got some ham, some cheese. No, not that kind of sandwich. So when it comes to die cutting, your sandwich is what you put together in order to cut your paper or your cardstock. Let's use cardstock in this case. So you can see here on these adapter plates, it kind of shows you different sandwiches that you can use. This adapter B shows you embossing, so you can actually use your dies to do embossing instead. And when you're doing embossing, you use different shims here. Now I'm showing you here the metal shim. This shim comes in handy if you're doing intricate die cutting. You want to add a little bit of extra pressure throughout the complete area of your die. So it would be a die that has many little holes, something with a lattice, maybe a cover die. You would probably use the metal shim with. And then what it does is it just creates a bit of extra pressure so that you only really have to put your die through once and it cuts everything nicely. Now, I'm not doing that. I'm just using a plain old die. So I'll put that canopy die through. I've got the die on top of the cardstock on top of the bottom cutting pad. I put the top cutting pad on top. I'm using only adapter A plus the platform. And you can see it cuts out nicely. Now, as I mentioned, see the die cut's kind of stuck within the die. So this is where this pick or pokey tool comes in handy. I actually just didn't have it at my disposal. I grabbed my tweezers here and just used it to kind of put through the hole and poke out the die cut piece. And then once you get a bit of the stem, you can kind of pull the rest out gently. Be careful because you can rip intricate dies like this. And you know, it takes a bit of practice, but you really get used to the amount of pulling you can do in order to get that out without ripping it. Now, as I mentioned, every die cutting machine is different, so you have to pay attention to the guides. There's usually some instructions that tell you exactly which sandwiches to use, and then you also play around with what works for you. Now, this pad I'm showing you here is a rubber mat, and that is what you would use for embossing. So you would do this here. You'd set up your sandwich like this. I probably would take adapter A off and put adapter B in, which is the red one. And then I would take an embossing plate, which is just this black one here, and then put it through with that to do embossing. Now, I just wanted to give you an idea there. This video is more on die cutting than embossing, so I'll leave that for another time. But those are the types of, I guess, shims or pads that you need. Now, this is another type of pad. It's a magnetic pad. It's an older one. It's from We Are Memory Keepers. I know that scrapbook.com and some other brands also have a magnetic sheet. I use this quite a lot, but it was more in the beginning when I first started die cutting. So you can see that it doesn't really have the magnetic feel to it much anymore. It's kind of ran out, but in the beginning, it really held the die a little better. Therefore, you wouldn't have to use things like washi tape to hold it in place. Nowadays, I found that the washi tape is just a little bit more reliable for me to prevent the die from shifting as it goes through the machine. So, I mean, again, preferences. Some people love the magnetic mat. I prefer to just use washi and my acrylic pads. So now that we've kind of sorted out the different pads that you can use, you can basically move on to the next step. And what is that? What essential tools do you need? Finally, so I can finally tell you what all of these tools on my table are. So the biggest thing that I think you need when doing die cutting, especially for the first time, you know, I've got this little kit here from Spellbinders. It has a lot of stuff in it that is very useful. It helps with like shaping flowers and stuff, die cut flowers. But there are bits and bobs in here which are really important. Like for one, the scissors. You don't have to have these scissors in particular, but you can see they come in handy when cutting your die cuts. They have the little thin or the more narrow ends so that it makes it easier to snip things and get a perfect cut. And again, you can use any type of scissors that work for you. Next, this I would say is the most important. It's a pick or a pokey tool. So I have a whole bunch here. This one has an embellishment wand at the end, and it's a straight pointy piece. I've seen some people use little pins like that. So, I mean, if you're, you know, working on a budget, go ahead and grab a little pin. You can use that. This other one here that comes with the Spellbinders tool-in-one has a bit of a curve on it. And again, this is all about preference. I prefer the long, straight pokey. But I do kind of keep that pick on there for other reasons. And you can see I have some balls there that are on the end for shaping flowers. Now, this is another thing that is great to have on hand, especially for more intricate dies. So as I said, probably the dies you'd use with the metal shim to make sure you're cutting everything out, cover dies, things like that. This roller brush, you can attach it to the end of that tool-in-one, and then what you would do is normally when you've cut an intricate die out, you have a whole bunch of paper that's left within the die in all the little holes. So you would take the die, I'm going to show you here with this one, even though it's not intricate, just to give you an idea. Now, everything would be cut there, so I'm using this wrong. 1 second, let me flip it. So this is what you would do. You'd kind of take the brush and it would poke through all of those little holes that your pokey tool would go through, and then it would just push out all of the extra little pieces of paper that might be stuck in it. So it's this little kit here with, you know, the scissors and the tool-in-one and stuff I just found helpful because it also has these in it. Now, these are my favorite. They are reverse grip tweezers. And these come in handy when you're actually placing your dies or your die cuts, sorry, onto your card. Now, these, I got the black tweezers there. They're just regular tweezers, but you can see you have to press down to hold your die cut. Now, when you have the reverse grip, you can kind of take your die cut and just stick it in there. And then I don't have to sit there pushing down on my hands. It's easier for your hands. It's more ergonomic for use. You can put your glue on and then place it down where you want it. And then all you have to do is push when you want to let go. So I find these, they come in handy, especially for the smaller little dies that you kind of want to tuck behind other die cuts. Now, the other thing I would recommend is having a glue bottle with a small nozzle. Now, you can see this other glue that I have here. Sorry, it's super old. I don't even use it anymore. It's got a thicker tip. And when I'm putting this on my die cut, the glue's kind of going everywhere. And I usually have to kind of put down like a wad of glue and then just stick the die in it, the die cut in it to get the glue on. It's a little messy and I don't really like that. So I use the Barely Art Precision Craft Glue. It is a little runnier than most glues and takes about maybe 10 seconds longer to get tacky than other glues, but it is well worth it. And it has to be a bit runnier so it doesn't clog the nozzle. So, you know, you take your long pin out and you can see how nicely the glue would go on those thin little vines in that intricate canopy die. Now, as I said, it takes a little while to kind of get used to the amount of pressure that you use because I said it is a little more runnier than most glues, but it doesn't take too long to figure that out. And once you do, you're gonna love it. I don't use any other liquid glue than this one. So, and I do recommend if you do get this, get some more of those little pins because you probably will lose them, and I definitely have. Now, the next thing that's important is low tack or washi tape. So I have two here. I have the yellow tape from Spellbinders, and I don't actually go out of my way to buy this because I normally use the washi tape, which works just as well. This just happened to come to me with the Better Press, which came out recently. And you can see I just use normal like Scotch tape dispensers and I just put my washi tape in there. So I'll just take the roll, pop it in there, and then I have a nice dispenser. I don't have to worry about finding the end of the tape roll while I'm trying to mess around with placing die cuts and all that type of stuff. So this little impromptu idea of placing your washi tape in those used dispensers really comes in handy. So as you can see, when I'm placing my die cut on my cardstock, I can put it where I want, put the washi, and you can see it's there. It's not going anywhere. You saw how much the die cutting machine kind of jiggled and moved as I pushed everything through it. So that really does come in handy because especially when your plates are warped like mine, you're definitely going to need those the washi tape, something to hold those dies in place. Now, the last tool I'm going to say is not a necessity, but it is nice to have, are magnetic sheets. Now, some people use the magnetic sheets to actually store all of their dies. They'll actually stick these. You can see that there's like a blue release paper on the back and it sticks like a sticker onto anything. Like I've shown this before in a past video that you can use this on your packaging and then stick your extra die cuts on top of it. I haven't done it for this one because it's only 2 dies, so it's easier to keep track of, but sets that have a lot more than like 2 or 5 dies, I'll use the magnetic sheets to kind of keep everything in place so that I'm not losing anything. It just makes everything much easier. It's even easier when planning out what to cut and what colors to use. So those are all of the tools that I think are very important for die cutting, especially if you're just getting into it. As I said, if you're on more of a budget, I'd say stick to the pokey tool, the tweezers, and the tape, and I think you'll be good to go. Now, a lot of people have asked me about the acrylic plates. There's no way around it. No matter what you use, they always seem to warp. There are some people who say you can kind of rotate your plates and that kind of keeps them flatter longer. I've never been patient enough to do that, so that's pretty much to my demise. You can try that and see if that works for you. Now, what I'm showing you here is that we've already pretty much done the next technique that I'm going to be showing you, which is positive and negative die cutting. So we cut out the positive part of the die, which is the actual canopy leaf, and then you've got the negative die cut, which is actually the remainder of the paper. So let's go ahead and get into this in a little bit more detail. So die cutting techniques, positive and negative die cutting, which we already did a little bit, but let's do it a little more. So this is basically the basis of die cutting, okay? So all you're doing is cutting some die cuts out of paper or cardstock. Now I'm showing you, this is my top plate here, and you'll see that I have a piece of paper on top. That one there is kind of all messed up. I'll throw it away and grab a new one, but you can see that there's all these indentations from all the dies that I've used previously. And I find that when you're cutting a panel, sometimes those indentations can get into the panel. So that's why I put the extra piece of paper on top. It's not really to add more pressure. It's just to stop this, see this green panel? It's going to stop that panel from getting extra marks in it once I put it through. So I'm going to actually arrange these canopy dies on this green cardstock. This is actually like a bit of a, it's got a little bit of blue in it. It's looking very green on the screen right now, but it has more of a teal look to it. And I'm taping my dies in place with the washi tape. And then I will kind of push the sandwich. I've got the acrylic pad on top with my extra paper for protection on my panel. I've got the die. Then I've got the cardstock, and the bottom plate I'm using adapter A along with the platform. So that's my sandwich. So I put this through and I can take off very carefully. So when you do this, you know the washi tape is low tack, but sometimes it does pull some of the paper off. So carefully pull that off. And then you can see on that die there was a little bit of the die coming off already, so I can just grab that and carefully pull it off. In the second piece, I'm going to have to use my pokey tool to kind of poke the stem there and get it going a bit. And then once I've got some of the die cut out, I can easily pull the rest of it out. And there you have it. There is your positive die cut. Now, as I did that, I got the positive pieces and I'm keeping the negative piece as well. So here's what I've got. I've got these two and this negative piece, and we're going to make 2 cards out of these. So I'm using some gray cardstock to contrast the teal. I actually just adhered it behind the negative piece there and attached it to an A2 sized card base. And now I'm going to work on my sentiment. So for my sentiment, I'm going to be using the You Inspire Me stamp set. And it's got some beautiful, like longer scripty sentiments on it, which I think would look nice with this card. So I'm going to do just a little bit of heat embossing with this. So I added my anti-static powder tool to some black cardstock. I stamped out the sentiment, and now I'm adding some white fine embossing powder. So I find that the fine embossing powder works better with sentiments. It kind of gets in all the little nooks and crannies so that your sentiment looks a lot more cleaner. Now that I've got that melted to the cardstock, I will let it dry a little or let it cool a little and then cut it down. I did kind of cut it on an angle at the end. I've been kind of into this angle cut lately. It's a little bit more different than just doing the straight banner cut. And now I'm adding some foam adhesive to the back of the strip. Now, foam adhesive is another thing I would say is an essential if you're the type of crafter who likes dimension in your die cuts. Now, I did actually do a video last week that shows you how to get your 2D dies to become 3D with a bit of cutting and dimensional foam like this. And I have various sizes. So, you know, back there I was kind of showing you that one foam piece was a little thicker than the other, and I like having that varied depth so that I can create that varied depth within my cards. So now that I've gone ahead and attached my sentiment, which has that little bit of dimension there with the foam adhesive, I'm going to go ahead and add some silver opal gems. Now, moving on to the next card. So we just assembled the negative die cut piece. Now we will put together the positive die cut piece. So I've cut down another gray piece of cardstock, and I've cut it to 4 inches by 5 1/4 to get like a 1/8 of an inch border around the edge. And now I've got the 2 canopy die cut pieces that we cut out. I'm just kind of arranging it in the center there. I've picked another sentiment from that same You Inspire Me stamp set. And I'm going to do the exact same thing. So I'm going to do some heat embossing, and this time I'm going to use some Ranger silver embossing powder to kind of go with the gray in the background. So I'll stamp this out. I've used my anti-static powder tool, which is always a must, otherwise you'll get some stray embossing powder here and there. I'd say it's always a must to use that anti-static powder on darker cardstock and when you're using lighter embossing powder. But when you're on white cardstock, I mean, if you forget, you can probably get away with not having to restamp, depending on how bad your, I guess, I don't know, how bad the embossing powder sticks to the paper, if it sticks in the proper places or not. So anyways, I've now cut down my banner, and this one I'll just keep the straight edge on either side because this is just going to be like a center banner sentiment piece here that's going to go over top of these canopy leaves. Now again, I can't resist the dimension, so I'm going to add some foam adhesive to one of the canopy leaves here, and then I'll just prop it up in the center of the card where I see fit. So once I've got this larger canopy leaf on there, I kind of want to position the next one. And I think for this one, I'm just going to glue it down. So now's my chance to use my Bearly Arts glue. You can see on the leaves, no problem getting the glue on there, but you can see how nicely that glue is going on the vines and how quickly I did it too. It really didn't take that long. I don't have glue all over the die cut. I do have a little bit of glue kind of leaking on the card panel, and that's only because I moved the die cut after I kind of put it down, which is my fault. But had I not done that, you probably wouldn't have seen any excess glue at all. And that's why, like, the small nozzle, it really comes in handy. So moving on, again, I'll do the exact same thing I did before and just add some more foam adhesive. Now I'm grabbing my foam squares that have a little more thickness here just to prop the sentiment up just a little bit more, because the canopy leaf is, it's got the thinner one and I want it to stand a little bit higher than the leaves. And that looks absolutely gorgeous as is. Now I'm going to do a couple more things. I'm going to add more of those opal gems. And I find that the silver, it just goes well with the silver embossing and the silver background here. It just makes it stand out a little more. And I mean, you could choose not to add any embellishments if you want. I have a problem, and that's the problem, is that I can't finish up a card without adding embellishments. Maybe one day I'll do it and then we can celebrate. But for now, I'm going to put those pretty little embellishments on this card. Now, another way you can step up your cards is to add just a little bit of detail. So I've got this white jelly roll pen, and all I'm doing is adding some lines and dots on the edges around the leaves of the die cut. And you could do this for any die cut. It could be a cartoon, like a stamped image die cut that you've cut out with coordinating dies. It could be standalone die cuts like these. It could be anything. And it just kind of gives it just a little bit something extra. Okay, and the last technique I'm going to share with you is partial die cutting. Now, I wouldn't say it's hard. Some people will say maybe this is a little bit too advanced for beginners, but I think you guys can do it. So, especially if you are starting off, it's really not that hard to do. Once you get the concept, it's really just a matter of following the instructions. So I've got these dies from the set Love Like No Other. And I've picked one of the flower bouquets here. It's on a curve. So what I'm going to do is kind of have like the buds and like half of the die kind of hanging off the edge. So partial die cutting, what it really means is that we're only going to cut half of the die. Now, how do you do that? It's actually more simple than you ever thought. So what you can do is draw a line. You see where I'm moving my finger? I'm imagining an imaginary line there. If you can't imagine it, that's okay. Go ahead and take your pencil and a ruler and draw a line exactly where you would like to cut. And now what I've done is I put my top acrylic pad in. So all I really have to do is kind of slide my paper with my die in between the sandwich, and that's where it's going to cut. Now you can see as I push down my warped pads here, where the edge of that top pad is where it's going to stop cutting, okay? So I'm actually turning this around because I actually want the other side to be cut. And I'm putting it down where that imaginary line is. So if you did draw a line, this is where you would line it up. You'd line it up with the edge of the top pad. Now run it through. Everything to the right is going to cut. Everything to the left is not. So as I put it through and pull it out, you can see here, if I remove the die, that it only cut that right side of the die, right? So that top half there is the portion that we can remove. So I have to finish off the cut here. And if you drew a line, all you really need to do is line up the top of the line on one edge and the bottom on the bottom edge. This kind of goes down to the corner. And then I'm only going to cut from the top right to where the die cut. Just that little bit, you see? Not all the way through, or you're going to cut off your partial die cutting. And now I took it down to the bottom. I cut from the bottom up to where the die cut, and that's it. I stopped. And you can see I took that apart and I have my partial die cut. Now there's this little section in there. I'm trying to cut it, but it's not going to work. So this is where those little scissors come in handy. Now I have another pair here. These are from Altenew, but you, as I said, can use anything that works for you. Now those small little scissors really help to get in those small little nooks and crannies, like in this die cut here. So now we have our partial die cut flower. I'm gonna take the actual stamp and line it up with the overhanging die cut there. And now I'm gonna stamp it out. So I'm going to be using some Memento ink here, which is perfect for alcohol coloring. I'm going to be doing some Copic coloring to color in that flower. Now you can see it looks complicated, but it's actually really easy. As long as you draw a line where you want, you know, half of your die to cut and the other half not to cut, line it up with the edge of your top pad to create the full sandwich, run it through, cut the two edges, done. Very simple. It's actually not that hard at all. Now I'm going to go ahead and stamp out the sentiment too. For the sentiment, I'm using VersaFine Clair Nocturne ink. I'm not going to be using any alcohol ink over top, so this just stamps a really nice crisp sentiment for me. Now I colored everything in with some reds and peach and green. I'm not going to show you all of that. It took a little bit of time, but you know, we have time for other videos for Copic coloring, but for this one, we're focusing on the die cutting. So let's go with that. So I'm actually taking the opposite bunch of flowers. So there's two sets of flowers in this set, and they are kind of opposite images of each other. So I'm going to take the other one just for a bit of variation, and I'm just going to stamp these out on the gray background with some ink from Pink Fresh Studio. It's the lightest gray in their grays. I believe it's called Misty Coast. And I'm just kind of randomly stamping out this image just to create a bit of interest in that gray background so that it's not so plain. You could have left it plain if you wanted to. You could have embossed it. You could do what you want with it. I just thought this was the easiest thing to do to give it some interest. And now I'll attach this panel to a white card base. And then for the actual partial die cut piece there, I'm going to add some more foam. So the foam just going to make it pop out a little more and give it that bit of dimension that I absolutely love. And then just like the other two cards, I'll finish this off with some more silver opal gems. Just kind of on the gray piece and a couple on the white piece there for a bit of interest. And we're done. So these are all the cards that we made today with a couple of the techniques that I showed you. Here is the one with the positive die cutting. Now you can see we have the canopy dies here, and I simply just cut it out of the panel that I used here for the negative die cut. So I got two cards out of this. I cut those two canopy dies. I used them with the positive die cuts on one card, and I use the negative die cut panel on the next. And then for the final card, we have partial die cutting, where you kind of have half of the die that gets cut and hangs off the edge. So those are the 3 cards that we made today using a couple techniques for die cutting and a whole bunch of questions hopefully answered with respects to die cutting if you're a beginner. I hope that you found this video helpful. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you did. Leave me a comment down below if you found it helpful. And I hope you guys have a great day. Don't forget to tune in next time. And all of the products that have been used in this video are linked in the description below. So if you're wondering, you can go ahead and check those out there. Have a great day, and I'll see you next time. Bye.